Hello and welcome back. I hope you've had a good break. You join me now for our talk with Mael Nison. As you're probably aware of Mael's work through his work in Facebook, where he has been building innovative infrastructures designed to empower thousands of JavaScript developers, including work on the JavaScript package management tool Yarn. Mael now works at Datadog, but he continues to have oversight of the development of Yarn whilst also building tools that target developers. During his free time, he also likes to bake pancakes. So please put your virtual hands together for Mael Nison with modern JavaScript infrastructures.
Thanks, Kathy. Hi, everyone. So today we're going to talk a bit about modern JavaScript infrastructure, what it means, and how we do this. So as I said, we're going to talk about what it is and why it doesn't matter. We're going to go over a few important features in front-end infrastructure, and then we'll go over some general tips on how to be efficient in improving an infrastructure. So first, what is front-end infrastructure? The infrastructure term is usually associated with backend, so it might surprise to hear it in the context of infrastructure is defined by the components providing commodities and services essential to enable, sustain, or enhance one's condition. There is nothing that is strictly related to the backend. So in the context of front-end, infrastructure means that instead of having the build being an afterthought that you delegate to the product team every once in a while, where someone says, oh no, the build takes too much time, we have to do something, you will instead have a team that will be in charge of focusing on the developer, on the stability, so that all your developers can be free of working on the product at the core of your application. By doing this mission, they will optimize workflow and make everyone more productive. The reason you should consider maybe having a team or at least one or two people focusing on this task is that it makes your teams be able to focus on the product itself. So it gives a better separation of concerns. And by doing that, it leads to shorter development cycles and faster iterations because, as I said, your product team can really be laser focused on the part of the product that they are expert into. Many companies have front-end teams. So, for example, Pinterest had people working on improving the build times. Shopify also has people working on improving the merge queue. And of course, Datadog has people working on their infrastructure as well, since I work there. The idea is that really, instead of having to break out of your quarter chaos in order to suddenly fix something inside the build or make an upgrade that you didn't anticipate, you will instead be able to delegate all those tasks to one people that will be able to give a long-term roadmap on everything related to the infra. So when we are working on infrastructure, there are a lot of points that we are very aware of and that we look into first thing when starting to work on a new project. The first one are previews. So the idea is that in order to make a good product feature, you need to develop it locally. And so in order to do that, you typically use something with a node loader so that when you make change, they can be seen immediately. But the question arises, what happens once you have finished your feature and push it on GitHub inside a pull request? Because the people that will be reviewing your work will read the code, but they will also need to see the code in practice. Without PR, they would have to check out your code, then run the builds, and then see on their laptops. It means that there is a very heavy cost in terms of context switch. Previews are a way to just let your team share their changes without having to make checkouts, just by pre-compiling your branches and showing them through special URLs. A lot of providers do this by default, like Netlify, Gatsby, or Virtual, but it's actually very easy to implement even manually. So for example, at Datadog, that's what we do. We have a GitHub action that is building our front end for each PR so that anyone can access any PR and see it live. Another thing to look for in infra are monorepos. So why monorepos and what are monorepos for those who are not super into that? So monorepos are a way to split your application from a single directory containing a bunch of sources into many directories with less sources. So for example, here on screen, you have the example of the yarn codebase that has been split into multiple directories. Then each of those directories can have a separate dependencies field that lists all the dependency that affects this folder and the dependencies to other workspaces. So for example, here you can see that the package fslib has a dependency on another workspace, the libzip, and by this means it will be able to use the sources directly from the repository instead of fetching them through a registry as it usually does. Monorepos are great for library, but they are also very good for private apps because even if you're not publishing the packages, they allow you to keep your dependencies close from whatever are actually using them. So for example, if we go back to the example I was showing, in this package.json, you see that the fslib only has a dependency on tslib. So if we didn't have workspaces, we would instead have a single package.json that would contain 300 dependencies, but with no context as to what is using them. Additionally, monorepos and workspaces force developers to be very intentional about introducing cross-dependencies into the application. So that's always a good thing, even at the moment of review, because it means that you clearly see whether someone is adding a cross-dependency to a package that is probably semantically wrong, so that you can surface this and discuss it at review time. And finally, they also are a very neat way to define ownership of the application, since workspaces allow you to split your application. So it's just one step further. You can have a code owner file that is covering specific directories, and it's much more clear who is working on which part of the application. When using monorepos, we recommend to use yarn over npm, even 7, because even if npm 7 now supports workspaces, they are still a bit young, whereas yarn has had years to work on them. Yarn 2 also replaces Lerna advantageously. So we have a lot of features that have been first tried by Lerna and that we decided to implement by default. For example, the Babel repository is now using Yarn 2 because of the commands like yarn workspaces for each. And if you're trying to get an idea of a very good monorepo example, you can actually look at the Yarn codebase, which is a very big monorepo, as I mentioned, that is using a lot of very modern techniques like in-sources file access. So it's a very good example if you want to see what is actually possible when using a monorepo. Text editors are also an area of choice when working on architecture, because when you think about it, where do you spend the most of your time when working? The answer usually is in front of an editor. It can be in front of an editor because you're writing code, but more often it will be because you're reading code or because you're reviewing code, which is the same as reading, really. So by being aware of the editors, maybe not all of them, but at least the main one in your company, you're able to build company-wide integrations like the VS Code task, which allow you to define a set of named tasks that people can just access through the command menu, or to apply settings to everyone in your organization. That's very important because as you start onboarding more and more people, you don't really want them to have different experience in terms of linting, because otherwise they will have to fix the linting once it reaches CI, or they will be frustrated because they don't understand why things are different. So you want a uniform experience, and by having some control on the editor configuration, it's much easier to reach that. One very simple thing that you can do is to add an editor config file, which is supported by most text editors nowadays, that ensures that, for example, the same indent level is used for everyone in the company. But on a larger scale, you can do this with linting, you can do this with prettifying, you can do this with TypeScript, a lot of areas of improvements. Speaking of CI workflows, those are one area where you can do a lot of things, especially now that every provider is now having scheduled tasks. So first, you can, of course, run regular test suits as a merge blocker so that a PR cannot be merged unless the test suit is passing. But you can go further. For example, you can have a set of expansive end-to-end tests run as scheduled tasks. For instance, let's say that you want to run tests on all browsers. It would be very expensive to do that on each and every PR. So instead, what you can do, if those tests are usually passing, is that you will run them on your master branch every hour or so as a scheduled task. You can go further in your workflows. For example, in Yarn, we are running actual benchmarks every 3 or 4 hours against all our competitors. So we are running Yarn install, we are running npm install, we are running pnpm install, and all that is then sent directly into a Datadog dashboard. So I have some rough idea of how we fare compared to the competition. And spoiler alert, it's pretty good. There are also a lot of tasks that you can do using workflows, even some that are a bit more exotic. So one other workflow that we have inside the Yarn repository is that each time you're opening an issue as a bug, we have a bot that will try to run your reproduction inside the issue on a virtual machine. And if all the tests are passing, then it will tell you that there is something wrong in your reproduction because we can't reproduce it. And by doing this, it means that we are shortening the time to fix a bug because we don't have to make the dance of, oh, but I can't reproduce your problem. Can you share more details? Instead, reporters can just know immediately that what they shared is not enough and try to investigate in order to provide all the information that we will need to fix the problem. In company settings, you can instead make auto fix for linting. Same thing by implementing an action that would trigger each time a commit is sent on a PR. There are a lot of options for CI workflows. So don't just stay on CI workflows or for test suites, because there's a lot of actions that you can do that are more complex than that. Speaking of CI workflows, one thing that I've noticed is very important on each infra is to avoid relying on the network. So a lot of people are doing something like Yarn install inside their project, inside their CI. You should really avoid doing this because as long as you rely on a registry, even one that is as famous as NPM or GitHub or anything, you will eventually reach a state where you cannot deploy because the network is down. So it might be your network, it might be your proxy that is doing something different, it might be the remote registry that is down and you cannot deploy. You should not rely on the network. That's critical. You have a lot of tools in order not to have to do this. With Yarn 1, you have these settings called Yarn Offline Mirror that allows you to store all your packages inside a specific directory so that you can check it out inside your repository. And instead of downloading them from the internet, Yarn is then able to reuse them directly from where you store them. With Yarn 2, it's a default that you can disable if you don't like that, but it's there if you need it. And if you have NPM or PNPM, you can use Verdaccio, which is a proxy for NPM that catches all the packages that you're downloading and store them somewhere so that you can just reuse them instead of querying the actual network. Any of those options is great, but the point is that you really not should rely on the network because it is very flaky. If we go one step further, if you store the packages inside your repository, then the question that we can start asking is, why does it matter to run yarn install? Is it actually a good thing that we have to run yarn install? No, it's a byproduct of how things work. But usually what I do is that I work on multiple features, and I'm sure you're doing too. And each time I was switching from one feature to another, I had to run yarn install in order to make sure that my dependencies were updated. Each time I was pulling from the remote registry, I had to run yarn install again to make sure that all the dependencies were updated. And if I would fail to do that, then there were a risk that my application would not work. And then I would have to figure out whether it's my problem, my diff that is introducing a problem, if it's just that I didn't run yarn install and some dependency is broken. Clone and Go is a change in this aspect, in that starting with Yarn 2, we don't really want you to have to run yarn install when switching branches. So we want to give you the tools to avoid that. It's a new workflow That means that you can now switch between a repository's branches without having to run yon install. It's much easier to make context switches, and it's very important because it unlocks a lot of new capabilities. For instance, here on screen you have the GitHub extension for VS Code. And inside this extension, you have a right-click menu that allows you to check out a pull request. Even though it's nice, in a typical setup, it's problematic because you still need to update your dependencies. If you don't, things might break. And even if the application was to make this automatically, install still takes some time, so it would be a subpar developer experience. But with Clone & Go, you just have to click the Checkout Pull Request button, and suddenly your application is ready to be modified without you having to do anything, and it's super fast. So how does it work? It's just that in this repository, so in this case, it's the yarn repository, we store all the package tarballs inside the repository, similar to what I mentioned about offline installs. And by doing this, there is nothing else that we really need. Everything is there. We can just run any application we want without having to run installs. So it's really nice, and you should check it out. It's hard to really understand how impactful this is in the workflow until you've tried it, and then you understand that, whoa, why doesn't it work like this always? The idea, basically, is that fast installs are good, but it still means that you need to run an install, and we don't want to run an install because installs are slow and installs are unpredictable. Something might break during an install. It's much better to have no more installs at all inside your workflows. Changing subjects, full type coverage are also very important in terms of infrastructure. I know what you're thinking. Your application might already be using TypeScript or Flow for their sources on the product. But is it also the case for scripts? Because your build scripts are very important too. And it's maybe even more important because they are the foundation upon which all your product is built. So if your build scripts are not covered by TypeScript, it means that they will be extremely difficult to understand for any new people joining your infra. And that even if you are making a change, there is a high chance that you will forget something and that something will break. Nowadays, it's very easy to type your build scripts, your node scripts, just by using Babel register or TS node, which will allow you to run your scripts as a TypeScript without even having to make a transpilation. You don't need Dino to do this. You just have to use Babel register or TS node. So I really recommend to spend some time into making sure that all your scripts are covered by TypeScript so that you're making the job much easier for everyone to understand what happens in your foundation layer. Internal integration are the last topic that we are going to discuss as far as features goes, and it's the most open-ended one. So the idea is that as your company grew, you will have more and more workflows of more and more tools that will interlace together. For instance, you might have a Circle CI job that you will go trigger a Jenkins job that will be based on the tags created on GitHub. You have a lot of different pieces that are merging together. But it's sometimes difficult, especially when you join a company, to know what are those workflows and to understand them. And the question arises, why do we have to understand them? And something that is very good in order to prevent the problems from arising because of too much complexity on your workflows is to abstract them behind a simple interface. For example, it might be just an interface that shows you all your deployments without you having to jump on GitHub in order to get the commit hash and generate the link. It might just be something that does use the GitHub API in order to fetch all those information and print them on a single page. The point is, abstract all workflows behind custom integration in a way that will allow you to simplify those workflows as much as you can. For instance, that's a kind of integration that is aware of what we do in our company. So at Datadog, we have an extension called Dogo that is able to inject some code into some websites in order to add some Datadog-specific context information. So in this case, you can see that the merge button on GitHub got turned into blue because it's code freeze season. And when it's code-free season, developers will be able to know that it's not the right time to merge just by going on the pull request interface. Otherwise, they would have to go on Slack in order to see, is it code-free season? Oh, I forgot I already merged. So this prevents a whole set of problems by making the information directly available to the engineers without them having to search for them. We have other integrations. So for example, here we have the type check that is simply running a TypeScript daemon in the background and querying it from WebSockets. By doing this, we have more abilities to track which are the problems inside the code base, but also print them in a format that is much easier to consume by our developers. There are a lot of things that we could still discuss regarding front-end infrastructure. For example, there would be the security aspect of it that we could abort with Snyk. There are the maintenance of it when you need to upgrade one package from one version to the other, when you need to investigate whether ES build is wall-to-wall, when switching from Webpack 5 to 4 to Webpack 5. We could talk about how to make efficient open source contributions, because when you work on infrastructure, you ought to make contributions to third-party projects in order to fix bugs or implement features that would make sense for your use case. We could do all that, but it's just a 25 minutes talk, so we will have to switch to the next part, which is the arsenal that you have when working inside an infra team in order to be efficient. The problem of infra is that it's very hard. You rarely get a product manager gathering feedback for you. You need to do this by yourself. You need to go to your teams and ask them, hey, what is painful for you when working on the product? And you will find that there are a lot of things that you can do in order to improve the experience of all developers in the company. So it's important to figure out a process to do so efficiently and to prioritize the tasks that you will be working on based on a lot of criteria. And in order to figure out what are the main tasks that you should work on, there are one important way, which is to communicate a lot. There are 3 feedback channels that you should use when working in infra in order to be sure that what you're working on will be impactful for your teams and that you are improving things on the long term. There are the mixed feedback, the active feedback channel, and the passive channel. The mixed channel means that you need to make yourself available and be a clear owner. People inside your company need to know that, oh, there is a problem, I need to go see Mael in order to fix it. The active channel means that you need to sync periodically with the teams to make one-on-one with engineers in order to gather intelligence about what is wrong in their workflows, in order to know whether what they are doing is subpar, and also in order to let them know what you are working on, because maybe in these settings, they will tell you, oh, but build time is not actually a problem. I mean, it's fast enough for me that I don't feel the burden of the time it takes to make a build, for example. And the passive channel is very important too, and means that you need to have a way to gather metrics, accurate metrics, and track their evolution over time. One trick about this is that metrics are not the most important thing about front-end, about infrastructure in general. It's easy to gather metrics, for example, let's say the build time, and to see, oh, the build time is at this level. I want to improve this and make it twice as fast. And that would be great. The problem is that by doing this, you didn't validate first whether it's actually impactful for the team. So as I mentioned in the active channel, it's important to go to the team in order to validate that the metric actually makes sense, because maybe it's just a number and making it lower will not have enough value on engineers. So in terms of metrics, what we are doing at Datadog is that we are having a hook on the yarn run command so that we can know how much time take all of the scripts that are running inside the repository. So for example, here we can get a pretty good idea of the number of type checks that are running inside the company and the time it takes in order to run them. By doing this, when we are working on improving type check time, for example, we can see that, oh yeah, the number is actually decreasing. So it's not just something like, oh, I run this locally and it seems to have a good effect. We can actually rely on practical numbers in order to know that what we are working on is having effects. So as I mentioned, you need to use all channels in order to be effective. You need to use the mixed channel for transparency so that everyone is aware of what is going on and that everyone knows that they can come to you if they have feedback about it. You need to use the active channel in order to plan ahead by asking directly to the first people that will be impacted by your changes what are the problems that they would like to see solved, and by using the passive channels in order to track your success over time. So it's really an endless cycle of interpreting data, then validating them, then tracking their evolution over time. So in conclusion, in order to succeed at infra, you need to plan your work long-term while still staying flexible. You need to communicate early with the teams, and you need to communicate often. A lot. Communication is really key in this kind of context. And you need to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And you need to do it twice because it's likely that people will have ideas about how to fix things. And you will need to really be very clear about what will be the changes and why to do this and how things are going to work. You need to have everyone agree on clear owners so that you still have the ability to make the changes that are good, but you need really to make sure that everyone knows what's happening. I hope that gives you a quick overview of infrastructure. And if you have any other questions, feel free to ping me. It's really an amazingly interesting topic because you're working not only for a product inside your company, but also for your colleagues by improving their daily work. And it feels good to be very close from them in order to know what are their pains. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mael. That was absolutely fascinating. And as somebody who used to work on infrastructure teams in the BBC, it rings so very, very true. And I would love to talk to you for ages about this, but unfortunately, we have no time for questions for this one. But if people have questions for you, can they contact you on Twitter?
Sure. I would be happy to answer.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for your excellent talk.